For 18 months, I was a ghost in my own apartment. I thought my roommate, Kaelen, didn't even know I existed, that to a massive 6'4" powerhouse athlete like him, I was just the quiet kid in the room next door. I was convinced he was straight, and I was content to admire him from the shadows. But when a terrifying storm shattered our windows and left me bleeding and broken on the floor, Kaelen didn't just help me up, he lifted me into his arms, carried me into his room, and with one slow, deliberate click of the lock, he changed our lives forever. He didn't just save me that night, he claimed me. Before we go back to that night in the apartment and the moment the door was locked, I want to share something truly special with you. We are officially just 50 subscribers short of our 1,000 subscriber milestone. As a student working hard on these stories, reaching this goal means I can finally start my journey toward earning on YouTube. If you've ever felt like a ghost waiting to be seen, please hit that subscribe button right now. Let's cross this finish line together. Now, let's see what happened after Kaelen turned that lock. For 18 months, Julian and Kaelen had existed in a state of perfectly curated indifference. They were the ideal roommates, not because they were friends, but because they were ghosts. Julian was an architecture student, a 19-year-old city boy who lived in a world of clean lines, blue light glasses, and caffeine-induced focus. Kaelen was his polar opposite, a massive 6'4" senior athlete who looked like he'd been carved from the very mountains he spent his weekends hiking. Kaelen was bronzed, powerhouse built, and perpetually shirtless in the heat of their cramped apartment, his intense hazel eyes usually fixed on a playbook or a screen rather than his roommate. They shared a kitchen, a bathroom, and a lease, but they never shared a conversation longer than "the internet is down" or "it's your turn for the trash." Julian admired Kaelen's physique from a distance, of course. It was impossible not to. Kaelen's muscles moved with a raw, effortless grace that made Julian feel small and lithe by comparison. But Julian assumed Kaelen was straight, a mountain of a man who wouldn't notice a quiet student like him. He kept his head down, his crush buried under layers of architectural blueprints. Everything changed on a Tuesday evening when a freak storm rolled in, turning the sky a bruised, electric purple. Julian was alone in his room, leaning over a complex structural model when the power flickered and died. The apartment plunged into a thick, suffocating darkness. Seconds later, a deafening crack of thunder shook the building, followed by the terrifying sound of glass shattering in the living room. Julian rushed out, his heart hammering against his ribs. A large oak branch from the tree outside had been torn away by the wind, smashing through their balcony door. Shards of glass were everywhere, and the wind was howling into their home, bringing a deluge of freezing rain. Julian tried to reach for the door handle to push the branch back, but a jagged edge of the broken frame caught his arm, slicing deep into his forearm. He cried out, the pain sharp and searing. He fell back, clutching his arm, blood beginning to soak through his white t-shirt. He felt cold, exposed, and utterly alone in the dark. Then, the front door swung open. Kaelen was home. In the beam of his phone's flashlight, Kaelen took in the scene, the shattered glass, the storm, and Julian slumped on the floor, pale and bleeding. Kaelen didn't hesitate. He dropped his gear and was across the room in 2 strides. "Julian!" Kaelen's voice, usually a distant rumble, was now a sharp, protective command. He knelt beside Julian, his massive frame shielding him from the wind and rain blowing through the broken door. I tried to fix it," Julian whispered, his voice trembling. "Don't move," Kaelen ordered. He lifted Julian effortlessly, his bronzed, shirtless chest radiating a heat that felt like a lifeline in the freezing room. He carried Julian into his own bedroom, the one room where the windows were still intact. Kaelen set Julian down and moved with a quiet, lethal efficiency. He grabbed a first aid kit and a clean towel. He sat on the floor between Julian's legs, his knees nearly touching Julian's, and began to clean the wound. His large, calloused hands were surprisingly gentle. "I thought you were straight. I thought you didn't even know I existed." Julian breathed, the adrenaline making him say things he normally would have kept locked away. Kalin paused, his hazel eyes snapping up to meet Julian's wide blue ones. The orange glow of a nearby emergency candle flickered across Kalen's powerhouse physique. "I've known you existed since the second you moved in, Julian. I was just waiting for you to look up from those drawings." Kalin finished bandaging the wound and stood up. He walked to the door, and with a slow, deliberate click, he locked it. "The storm is getting worse," Kalin said, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly hum. "You're staying in here tonight, with me." The sound of the lock clicking into place felt like the start of a new world. Inside Kalen's room, the chaos of the storm felt miles away, replaced by an electric tension that made Julian's breath catch in his throat. Julian sat on the edge of the bed, his slender frame looking tiny against the backdrop of Kalen's rugged, athletic life. Kalin didn't go back to the living room. He didn't check on the broken glass. Instead, he stayed in the small space with Julian. He moved to the fireplace in the corner of the room, a luxury Julian hadn't realized Kalin used, and began to stoke a fire. The flickering orange light danced across Kalen's back, highlighting every ripple of muscle and the sheer power of his build. "You're shaking," Kalin noted without looking back. "It's just the cold," Julian lied. Kalin turned, his intense gaze pinning Julian to the spot. He walked over and sat down beside Julian on the bed. The mattress dipped significantly under Kalen's weight. He reached out, his large hand gently cupping Julian's pale cheek. The contrast between Kalen's weathered, rough palm and Julian's soft skin was startling. "I'm not letting anything else hurt you tonight," Kalin said, his voice a possessive rumble. For the first time in 18 months, the ghosts were gone. Julian looked up at the man he had been watching from the shadows, and he saw something in Kalen's eyes he hadn't expected. A deep, simmering hunger that had been hidden behind that athletic indifference. "Why did you lock the door, Kalin?" Julian whispered. "Because I'm tired of sharing you with the rest of the world," Kalin admitted, his thumb tracing the line of Julian's jaw. "I've watched you hide in your room for months. I've watched you walk past me like I was just a piece of furniture. Tonight, there are no blueprints, no practice, just us." Kalin leaned in, his scent a mix of rain, cedar, and clean sweat filling Julian's senses. When their lips finally met, it wasn't a tentative first kiss, it was a claim. It was the sound of 18 months of silence finally breaking. Kalen's kiss was firm, demanding, and filled with the protective fury he had shown when he saw Julian bleeding on the floor. Julian's hands found Kalen's shirtless torso, his fingers tracing the hard lines of the cowboy-turned-athlete's physique. Kalin groaned into the kiss, pulling Julian closer until the smaller man was practically draped across his massive chest. In that moment, Julian realized that the locked door wasn't to keep the storm out, it was to keep them in. They stayed like that for hours, talking in low voices as the fire died down to embers. Kalin told Julian about the pressure of the team, the loneliness of being seen as just a powerhouse, and how Julian's quiet presence had been the only thing that felt real. Julian spoke of his fear of not belonging, of being a city boy in a world of giants. As the night wore on, Kalin pulled the heavy blankets back. He didn't ask Julian to leave. He simply guided him into the center of the bed and climbed in beside him. Julian laid his head on Kalen's chest, listening to the steady, powerful thrum of the man's heart. He felt claimed, shielded, and for the first time in his life, completely understood. When the sun finally rose, the storm had passed, leaving the valley bathed in a soft silver light. Julian woke to the feeling of Kalen's massive arm draped possessively over his waist. The weight of it was a reminder that the night before hadn't been a dream. Kalin was already awake, watching him with an intensity that made Julian's heart skip a beat. The rugged stubble on Kalen's jaw and his dark, messy hair gave him a wild, untamed look in the morning light. "You're still here," Kalin rumbled, his voice even deeper with sleep. "I didn't want to be anywhere else," Julian replied, his blue eyes bright. They eventually had to face the reality of the apartment. Kalin stood up, his shirtless physique a stark contrast to the domesticity of the morning. He led Julian back into the living room, which was now damp and littered with glass, but the fear was gone. Together they worked to clear the debris. Kalin did the heavy lifting, moving the massive branch and boarding up the door with a strength that Julian found hypnotic. As they finished, Julian looked at the front door, the door that had always been the boundary of their separate lives. "What happens now?" Julian asked. Kalin stopped what he was doing and walked over to Julian. He put his hands on Julian's shoulders, his grip firm and immovable. "What happens is that the roommate thing is over," Kalin said. "You're mine now, Julian. No more ghosts, no more hiding." Julian realized then that the storm hadn't been a disaster. It had been a catalyst. It had torn down the glass walls they had built between themselves. He looked up at his massive protector, the man who had seen him when he felt invisible. As the morning sun spilled across the apartment, Julian finally realized that he wasn't a ghost anymore. The storm had taken the glass walls, the silence, and the distance, leaving only the steady, protective heartbeat of the man holding him. Kalin didn't just offer a room or a lease. He offered a home where Julian was finally seen, valued, and claimed. In the quiet of that new beginning, they both knew that some things are meant to be broken so that something much stronger can be built in their place. Thank you so much for staying until the very end of Kalin and Julian's journey. Before you go, I want to take a second to look at you, my community. Because of your support, we are now officially only 50 subscribers away from our 1,000 subscriber goal. To every single one of you who has already hit that button, thank you. You are the reason I can keep telling these stories as a student, and your comments are the highlight of my day. If you're new here and this story of an invisible boy finding his protector touched your heart, please consider subscribing right now. You aren't just a number. You are the final piece we need to cross this finish line together. Let's make this milestone happen today. Question of the day: if you had to choose between a life of quiet safety in the city or a life of unpredictable passion behind a locked door in the mountains, which would you pick? Tell me your choice and why in the comments below. I read every single one.